Hey, and welcome back into the show. Chad here with you again, coming to you live from sunny Seattle, which has not been the case the past few days. By the time that you're listening to this, actually, I'm likely already in Canada, making my way up to Alaska for the summer. My wife and I are making a trip to spend our entire summer in Alaska. We were there last year and excited to be back and explore more of the great frontier that is Alaska. I'm excited to share this conversation with you today. That was with my guest, Miles Santo. It's representative of, I guess, this time in my life and how traveling and these new experiences are kind of leading to new connections and new relationships. I was introduced to Miles through my mutual friend, Nate. If you have heard Nate on the podcast, he's been a recurring guest, been on a couple of times. I talk about him often. And he introduced me to Miles. They had met while Miles was on a vacation to Sedona, Arizona. And Nate was just like, hey, I think you guys would enjoy connecting. And it was true. I did enjoy connecting with Miles. I think I enjoyed it so much because so much of Miles' story reflects a lot of my story. The story of going through school and going through college and in performing a certain way and enjoying the response that performance got. And one day realizing, maybe I aspire to do something different. Maybe I aspire to be someone different. In this conversation, you're going to hear Miles talk us more through his journey of becoming a dentist, going to dental school, and how he made so many of the decisions that led up to that moment in his life and joining his family's practice. And we dive into all of the success that he had at his family practice and continues to have at his family practice. And yet there was this piece of him that felt like it wanted more. More of what exactly? Well, you'll have to listen to find out. And how did that actually come to be? How did Miles sort of come to this realization that maybe he wanted more, and how did he go through this process of transformation? Well, it's a story that I am excited to let Miles share with you. He's my guest. The conversation is next on A Level Deeper. I hope you enjoy. It's funny, as I was thinking about and preparing for this conversation, knowing that we were going to talk today, I'm trying to make what feels like two kind of like parts of you connect in my brain. So for those of you listening, Miles and I have met through a mutual friend, Nate Langley. Nate, of course, has been on the podcast a couple of times. Nate is a very special person in both of our lives. And so in the ways that I've encountered you so far, Miles, it's this really deep, reflective guy. You're on Instagram. You're talking about men's work. There's these beautiful photos of like you and your family out in the desert. And we're sitting here today. You've got this really cool, like long hair, and you're a dentist. And it almost like in my mind, I'm trying to picture this guy in a dental office, and it's not fitting like the typical, idea or mold that I picture of the dentist. I guess I'm curious to learn more about, how you see the relationship between maybe some of these different parts of you, or just these different things that make up all who Miles Santo is.
Yeah. You're not the first person to say that. There was a moment. So I was going out to a immersion for my original men's group. We were going out to Lake Tahoe, and this is last May. So a year ago, I get off the plane and my hair is down as well. When I'm a dentist, my hair is back. No one knows. I mean, they could see my bun perhaps, but my hair is back. So I get off the plane. This random man comes up to me. He goes, I got to ask you a question. I said, okay, what? He goes, I got to know, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a dentist. He goes, no, you're not. Shut up. I said, I'm a dentist. He goes, no, that doesn't fit. That's not you. I said, look, man, I don't know what to tell you. I love men's work too, but I'm a dentist. And I just kind of walked away. But that experience to me represented the vibrancy that I was putting out into the world. And vibrancy is one of the pillars that I hold really near and dear to my heart. So living a vital life, having that boundless energy, that life force energy to kind of really show up powerfully, but also kind of re-tap into like the vibrancy that I was born with, right? That birthright vibrancy. So we get kind of conditioned as we get older, right? We lose a bit of that extra juice that we have over time, whether it's society, coaches, teachers, parents, whatever it is, someone telling you can't be who you are. So that vibrancy is a special feeling alive meter that I like to share with people. So I was excited when I got that affirmation from the universe in the form of a stranger saying, hey, who are you and what do you do? And then he said, that doesn't seem to add up. So I am still the same person, even when I'm in the dental office. And I think my patients do connect with me, but I also am very aware that I have different hats I'm wearing, but I want to present as the same man. Even if my uniform's different, I am still me, and you're going to get me in every expression of myself.
I love that. I want to go back to this idea of vibrancy. I like that word a lot. Have you found that, have you carried this vibrancy through your whole life? You talked about like as children, we have this element of vibrancy. Is that something that you lost along the way in your story and are reconnecting with? Tell me about your relationship to this idea of vibrancy.
Yeah, you're hitting on some really important stuff here. So my relationship with vibrancy was an unconscious thing as a child. I just was who I am, and I was happy to be that way. But then when fourth grade came around, I had my first really difficult bullying experience. And that bullying experience was 3 other boys in class, and a couple of them were actually older. You know how people kind of hold a kid back 1 year? So they were older and bigger than me, and they didn't like who I was. And I never was able to figure out why. But that was the first time I encountered bullying. And I've gone through different bullying phases, 4th grade, 6th grade. I transferred high school because it got so bad when I was a junior. And then I even had a fake Instagram account made about me when I was in dental school, of all places, where you think there's a lot of professionals and whatnot. And then I actually had a bullying experience in one of my men's groups as well. So I've had these bullying experiences follow me throughout my life. And I actually have come to peace with it now, where I think it's actually me showing up as me, shining my light, made other people uncomfortable. I think I act as a mirror for people, where they're now seeing themselves as, someone that maybe they're not happy with what they're having, like what they're seeing back, whatever it is I'm reflecting, they're not happy with what they're seeing. So instead of them building themselves up, they want to tear down. So it's not necessarily a jealousy thing, but I think it's a mirror of my light. And I'm happy to shine it. But yes, I did dim my light significantly after high school. And I would say that my 20s very much were not me. Very, very much not me. So, and I lost that light. And it's only been this journey of inner work over the past 6 years that's allowed me to rediscover my light and actually have the courage to start shining it again. And that's why my hair is long and my hair is down today. It's part of that outward expression of the internal change that I've gone through.
Okay, I want to hear more about your 20s. Describe for me the ways in which you felt like you were dimming that light, or you weren't connected to this vibrancy. Who, if we met you 10 years ago, who would we have met?
Okay, so I graduated college weighing 215 pounds with a shaved head. And I just finished baseball, totally disembodied, though. I could not have gotten out of college faster. Could not have been more excited to graduate and leave because it had become such a toxic place for me. I did play baseball in college and I enjoyed my time with the team, but the environment of the school just was not conducive for me to be who I am. And it was not a comfortable place. So I went from high school, where I went through this bullying experience, and I transferred and I learned to hide myself, and I continued to hide myself through college. Fast forward to a year off in between college and dental school, I still didn't discover myself, even to the point that I was smoking weed a couple of times a week. Like, I've never done that in my life, but I was doing it because I was hanging out with people who did it. And it was like, oh, well, I guess I'll just do this. So it was, again, succumbing to things that are not congruent. I don't even drink alcohol anymore. Definitely haven't touched a drug, unless it was a plant medicine ceremony journey that I am interested in, but I've yet to do. So I very much want to go on a psilocybin journey, but I have not done that yet. So I find that to be different. But recreationally, I don't do anything like that. So me, I didn't need those things, but I was doing it because I was trying to fit in. I had dimmed my light. So here I am, this heavier guy, shaved head, and I am following all the things that I was told to do. I ended up a dentist because my father's a dentist. And I was told to be a doctor or a lawyer my entire life. Go be your own boss. Now, not the worst things in the world, but it was there was an expectation for me to join the family business. Once I made the decision, like, oh, hey, yeah, I'll go be a doctor. But then I spent time in a hospital. I was like, I don't really like that. It was like, oh, go see dad's office. Okay. Oh, I like that more. That feels okay. I could do that. I love my childhood. I really enjoyed never wanting for anything. I was very, very fortunate. So I was comfortable and willing, like, okay, hey, yeah, dentistry will be good. It'll provide for my family. It will give my family the lifestyle that I desire and I'm used to. Cool. I'll go do that. Pour all my resources into getting into dental school. But then for 4 years in dental school, I was nowhere near who I am today. Dental school is this toxic place where misery loves company. So all everyone does in dental school is they just try to outshine each other's misery. Oh, you had a bad day today? Well, guess what? Guess how bad I had it. So then you just sit in lunch and you would just complain for hours. And it was this negative environment. And guess what? I wasn't in an environment that I actually love. I love nature. I love being outside. I love the sun. Guess what? I would spend 10, 12 hours a day in school, blue light environment, stuck away in a windowless room, just really soul sucking stuff. And I graduated dental school having no idea who I was. And if it wasn't for my wife, I never would have found who I am.
Okay. I want to come back to that in a second. Tell me more about, this idea of, okay, you said I became a dentist because my father was a dentist. And, I'm just curious I'm thinking about someone who might be listening, who maybe their parents are part of a family business. Maybe they find themselves in the family business. Tell us more about that decision of coming to the conclusion that you're going to enter the family business. I mean, did that feel like the thing that you ultimately wanted at the time? Did that feel like the path that was going to be most exciting or fulfilling? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? Because it's got to be very nuanced, I imagine.
So I have a number of different thoughts. I'll try to make them succinct. So when I was 18 years old or 17 years old, I'm trying to apply for college, right? And it's like, okay, what college can I go to? At the time, I had two options, and I wanted to play baseball in college. My SAT scores were not that great, so I wanted to use baseball as a skill to get me into the best college I could go to, because that was also something that was conditioned within me. If you want to be successful, you have to go to the best college possible. That was like, I was the guy, you had to get A's to show that the achievement was that thing, to make me feel like I was gaining the love that I wanted. No shame on my parents or anything like that. It's just I felt like I needed to earn the love through the grades and through the performance. So I'm focused on trying to get the best college I can. Johns Hopkins and Swarthmore were the two options. My father went to Johns Hopkins. Obviously, everyone knows that that's a great school. Swarthmore doesn't have the notoriety, but it's actually like an even better school. And I ended up going to Johns Hopkins to go on a recruiting trip. And I go and they're like, oh, you're Mike Santo's kid. Oh, he had this record, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm not going here. I'm going to go to Swarthmore. So I went to Swarthmore. That's outside Philly. But then the second I got to Swarthmore, I felt so out of place that I retreated back into like, well, what's safe? What do I know? So I had the courage for some reason at 17 to go my own way. But then the second I got to college, I was like, oh, I'm going to go be a dentist and work with dad because that feels really safe. So I did like a total 180 within a year. So it felt safe for me to go be a dentist. I knew it. I saw it. I could do it. I felt like I could. So then I pour all my resources, my life into being a dentist. I get there, but then I'm 27 years old. Fast forward, just graduated from dental school. I'm going to be going to my dental residency. I'm starting to think about the family business. And I'm like, well, I'm doing all the things I achieved the dream, but what do I do now? What now? And that question of what now really stumped me, and it was scary. And it was like, is this it? Because then I'm working in the practice for a couple of years, and I'm your age, I'm 30, and I'm going, is this it? Like, is this really the thing I worked for? And I'm just going to do this for 30 years and take a couple of weeks off a year and then go retire and do what? And that didn't feel like I was living life to me. So it was having to kind of get comfortable with rewriting what is my own story and getting comfortable with who actually am I. So it was a difficult process, but a lot of the choices I made were conditioned within me by my family, by my teachers, by my coaches. And when you go into a family business, there's a whole different dynamic. Some people think it's a lot easier to go into a family business because something's established. But then there is this process of individuation where if you want to stay in a certain mold and you want to not ruffle feathers, you'll just stay exactly the way you were in your childhood. But if you really want to become your own man, in my instance, I'm a man, I want to become my own man, I have to individuate a bit. And it felt like I was just banging my head against a wall with my family in regards to the vision I had for the business versus the vision they had. And of course, the business has grown. It tripled its revenue in 5 years. We quadrupled the size of the team. Everything we did was unbelievably successful, but the energy behind it was pushing and it was hard. And it was because I wanted to go through this process of individuating. And as I was deconditioning the conditioning, it brought up a lot of internal strife and a lot of conflict. And I wasn't even ready to handle the conflict. So then it was messy. So now I've gotten on the other side where the conflict is not as messy because I've learned how to communicate better. But for years, I was resentful, bitter, and defensive because I didn't know how else to express myself. So there is that element when you're going into a family business where if you don't know how to communicate or you don't actually know who you are, you'll just end up probably really bitter and really angry all the time because you feel like you're banging your head against the wall because the two generations don't see eye to eye. So for me, I had to learn how to decondition and become my own person. And in the process of that, I had to learn how to share my truth, but do it in a compassionate way instead of a defensive way, which for years I was doing it in a defensive way and I was just hurting people. Now I feel like I'm getting a little bit better in communicating cleanly and clearly, yet with compassion, but it's also honoring who I am. I don't know if I totally answered your question.
Yeah. Well, so I'm curious, as you look back on your journey and story, I'm curious I don't know if I love the word advice, but I guess that's what I'm going to use in this instance. If someone is in your shoes at 17 or 18 and they're thinking about going into a family business or they're thinking about maybe, going and doing something else, do you have some wisdom that you would share with that person based on some of your experience?
It's a great question. And I think it's a little difficult just because in my own experience, I like to speak from experience. I don't want to speak from a place of like, I read a book and now I know this thing, right? So in my own experience, I went through the public school system and I got taught to think a certain way. And I didn't know how to actually think for myself or discover who I actually am. So at 17, I'm making a big life decision, what college to go to, what career do I want to follow. But I had no idea who I actually was. I didn't know what my strengths were. I didn't really know what my weaknesses were. Maybe subconsciously I knew some things, but I didn't put serious thought into it. And how could I? Because I never got taught how to think. It was just this very, rinse and repeat, study for a test, multiplication test, and then, fill in the bubbles and then you're good, right? And then you forget the information, it's gone. So I think as a society, if I were to talk to a 17 or 18-year-old, I would hope that maybe they had the guidance to learn how to start thinking for themselves when they're 12 or 13. And they've had some time to actually figure out who they are. Because if I talk to a 17-year-old right now who just has gone through the school system and they're just like, yeah, tell me what to do. I could tell you, learn who you are, figure out who you are. And they'll be like, oh, I don't know what that means. What do I do? Where do I even start? I think because I see patients all the time. Right. I see probably 20 or 30 patients a day, depending on how busy the office is in terms of cleanings and whatnot and exams that I have to do. My own schedule is not that busy, but seeing patients all day, I see the younger generation. They don't have any idea what they want to do. And I can barely get them to communicate with me. And generally, the only thing that will get them to communicate is hey, how's TikTok? You watching any good videos today? So they're just outsourcing themselves and watching other videos instead of really getting to the root of who they are. Now, this is a generalization. There absolutely are kids who are the shining future of our country. But overall, it would be difficult to give advice to people in that situation unless they were learning how to think for themselves. If they were able to think for themselves and say, hey, mom and dad do this thing. They love this thing. I loved my life. I want to go do that thing too because that feels like it fits me. That's a different answer than I've seen this modeled to me. I think I can go do that thing. It feels safe and it'll be good enough. This idea of good enough, right? And am I enough, right? You just immediately go to this place of hey, I saw this. I think I should go do it. You get there and you're like, this doesn't really feel like it, but you didn't know who you were. So then all of a sudden you're 30 and you say, wow, this doesn't really feel very good. I had a client call today and he told me that he at 15 said his dream was to become a pastor. And then at 25, he was a pastor running his own church, and he was having panic attacks. He was throwing up, and he absolutely hated it. He never was more miserable in his life. Now, I'm not saying he was wrong when he was 15, but his body was screaming at him saying, hey, this is not the thing for you. And fortunately, he listened to it. But some people don't. Many people will say, well, he was 25 with no kids. So that's but if you're 34 like me with a child, do you have the willingness and the courage to go uproot your life if you realize you chose something that wasn't really meant for you? There's a lot of ramifications there. That's a very big decision, and you have to have a lot of faith to be able to have the courage to go take action and change your life. So for me, I'm not leaving dentistry, but creating my men's coaching business felt like a much more true expression of me. So this conversation started with saying, hey, you don't look like a dentist. Well, you're right. I'm not just a dentist. I'm actually just me. And me is someone who has many different hats. So dentistry happens to be a skill that I'm good at, but the men's coaching feels like the real passion that I have that I want to share with the world. I'm in a position where I'm able to do both. I feel very fortunate with that. But I also have a lot of hats that I'm wearing, and it's important that I have the capacity to do so. So if children or 20-year-olds, et cetera, want to be able to think about what should I do, you have to have the capacity to do so. So if we're just playing video games all day, or we're chasing girls, or we're drinking and whatever it is, we're probably not spending a lot of time contemplating who we are. And we're also probably not spending a lot of time on our vitality. So we started with vibrancy, right? So vitality and vibrancy, those are big, big pillars to help you show up powerfully in this world. In my opinion, if you're able to regain the energy of your youth and reclaim your natural vibrancy, those two things will give you clues as to what your purpose is. And then we're able to start living a purpose-driven life. And that purpose will be more than just your family. I see a lot of men today where their purpose is their family. I don't think your purpose is your family. I think your purpose should be specific to you. Your family can be a part of that. Your family is someone that you're going to care about. You love them. But what happened if your family disappeared? Would you just be lost for the rest of your life? Or do you, Chad, have a deeper purpose for yourself beside your wife, beside living in, maybe the traveling the country, living in the van, having the podcast? Like, I don't know, but like, what is that purpose for you that's outside of being a husband? So for me, that's where I think a lot of people need to get to is thinking about these deeper questions.
So, okay, let's go back to this idea of thinking for yourself. And I resonate with this a lot. So my story is similar to yours in that growing up, I'm observant. I like to observe people, situations, and what I observed was when I perform really well in school, when I get really good grades, I get recognized. I get celebrated. I think back to, in middle school, I was in the all A's, all 3 years club. And I was one of 3 people to get all A's in the whole school, my entire middle school career. And we had this big ceremony, right? And I got my name called and I got to stand up and go get this plaque and everyone clapped for me. And not that those are necessarily bad things, but it was like, okay, I'm taking note. If I perform really well, if I do really well in school, people seem to really like that. So let me continue down this path. Okay, then I can go to college. I can do the same thing. If I perform well, I can get a good job. I'm at General Motors starting my career. And I had this moment where it sounds like maybe it was sort of similar to when you went to Swarthmore for that 1 year of like, I had this moment of I graduated college. Now I have the opportunity to chart some of my own path and maybe start thinking for myself. And I panicked. I freaked out. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to do that. And I found myself, it's just like you're going down this very defined path and then all of a sudden the path is gone. And it's a scary moment. So I'm probably 21, 22, maybe for the first time really thinking for myself, what do I want for my life? Do you feel like, is that kind of what happened in that year at Swarthmore? You like got this opportunity to start thinking for yourself and you were like, whoa, this is kind of freaky, and then you went back the other way?
Yeah, so I got a lot of recognition and satisfaction from achievement. And then when I go to Swarthmore, it was the hardest academic environment I've ever been in. It was even harder than dental school. And I struggled immensely. No longer the things I did would keep getting me A's. In fact, I never got an A until I was a senior at college. So I had a 2.7 GPA when I was a sophomore, for instance. My advisor told me, you're not going to become a dentist. You can't do it. You're not capable of it. So I had a moment of a crisis of confidence in that moment. And I went for the thing that felt safer because the unknown felt too scary. Now, this is subconscious, though. This was not me sitting under a tree pondering all these things. This was just my body reacting the only way it knew how, which was safety, security. Dad's a dentist. All I got to do is get into dental school, go be a dentist. I can work with him. I will literally live his life and I'll be okay. That's all I could think about. And I spent years just saying to people basically like, I want to be as good of a dentist as my father. That was my entire goal, was to show up on day one and be as good as him, which is completely unrealistic. He had been doing dentistry for 30 years. There is no comparison between someone who's been doing dentistry for 30 years and someone who's fresh out of school. There just isn't. So I put all this external pressure on myself to basically be my father, and not because he told me to. This was all just conditioned within me. It was not my dad saying, you have to do this. Yes, there were messages that were like, hey, you should go be a doctor. You should go be a dentist. You should be your own boss. There was messages, but there was no like, Miles, you're going to do this specific thing. It was all internally driven by me because I was scared, because I was afraid of the unknown. And this entire year, since I've stepped into the men's coaching, has been the most uncomfortable year of my life, because I have stepped into the unknown willingly, faced fear of rejection, which is also bringing up all the fear that I associate with the bullying experiences that I've gone through. And I've had to literally do EMDR therapy to try and get those experiences out of my body and allow them to be processed, because my body was holding on to them for so long. So there are deep triggers within me that I had to confront that I didn't even know were there until I began this entrepreneur journey of going out on my own. Because again, I spent the last 6 years building my family's business, and it became it was already a success before I showed up. In all intents and purposes, my father was a success before I showed up. But I just basically quadrupled the business through my vision. And of course, our team did as well. We had an unbelievable team, and we found the right people and et cetera. But there was never really any risk or pressure on me other than the fact that I felt like it was mine. So I internalized all this pressure. I thought the business was mine, but in reality, it was still my father's business. So now this is the first time in my life that I am actually creating my own thing. And I need to have my own thing. That's something I've learned and I've recognized. So I can still be at the office. I can still be a dentist. I can work with the family, but I need my own thing as well. And now it's brought up all the unknown. And that's the scariest part. But I feel a lot more willing to face it now than I did when I was 18 and I didn't know any of these things. I wish I could go back and hug that 18-year-old and say, hey, buddy, it's going to be okay.
Okay. How would you say or describe, how does someone start thinking for themselves? How can we be aware of if we are thinking for ourselves or if we aren't? How does that process start?
So I'm pondering here as you ask that. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, if we learn how to show up powerfully in this world and we learn how to resource ourselves in a proper way where we have the right energy, we're showing up magnetically, we have a purpose, we figured that out, we do those things, we show up powerfully, then we can get to a place where we can start thinking for ourselves, because we're now asking deeper questions. We're trying to figure out what our authentic self looks like. Within authenticity, there's clues, right? As to what is your true expression. Like, you can go back to your childhood and look at, like, what were the things that actually made me happy? Even look at today, like, what are the things that you love, but maybe you're not very good at because you just haven't practiced them, versus what are the things that you are really good at, but they make you feel dead inside. Those are clues as to what your authentic self is. So if we can start to figure out our authentic self, then we can start expressing ourselves more fully. And within that will be inner alignment. As our inner alignment presents, I really very firmly believe that the more abundance we will attract. And it's not necessarily just in a money version. Like, abundance is far more than money. It is a richness of life, in my opinion. So if you want to think for yourself, I think you have to start with charging yourself up and resourcing yourself in an adequate and proper way. So evaluating what are our energy inputs versus our energy outputs. How drained are we all the time? Do we feel energized when we wake up in the morning? Does going to work make us excited? Or do we just feel like we're on this proverbial, like, endless hamster wheel that's going in a circle and we're just living for the weekend? Then we numb ourselves out on the weekend to forget how much we hated Monday through Friday. And then we wake up on Monday saying, F this, it's Monday. God, I don't want to go do this. So for me, if we want to start thinking for ourselves, we have to be able to develop our own mind. But we have to have the energy first. If we don't have the energy, we'll be too exhausted to even question who we are. So if we have the energy, then we'll be able to have the willingness to say, who am I? Then you start asking better questions. You go find mentors, go find coaches, go find groups. Like, do it with other people. Don't do it alone. I did it alone for the first 3 years of this growth journey. My first mentor in my men's space said, don't lone wolf your life. I was the lone wolf. I read 97 books in 2020. I also had my office closed. My office was also closed for 3 months. I had a lot of time on my hands. I was not a father yet. I read 97 books. I was outsourcing my own thoughts and mind to the authors I was reading. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't read books. You should absolutely read books. They're an amazing resource. But I was still consuming so much content that I was now no longer able to, I just hadn't figured out how to hear my own voice. So developing our own mind also is related to our highest selves. Are we able to hear our intuition? And the only way to do that is to get still. I'm not saying you have to go meditate under a tree like a monk, but if we can figure out what are the things that help us feel most connected to source, to God, to whatever you want to call it. For me, it's going on a hike, being in nature. That gets me connected to the land and connected to source. That's where my higher thoughts come through. So I need to put myself in more environments like that. So for me, being in dental school in the middle of Newark, New Jersey, in a very urban environment where I was afraid to step outside because it was a dangerous place as well, I didn't spend any time in nature. How could I ever have heard my highest self talk? I couldn't.
Right.
I was also too busy studying. So we also can't develop our own mind if we're too busy doing other things for other people. So we have to have space and time, and then a willingness.
I really love the idea of asking deeper questions. You know, I think that's sort of the foundational element of this show, is asking some of those deeper questions, thinking together on some of these things that we're talking about here. And like that question that you pose of who am I? I mean, that's a big question. And I think for a lot of people, that's a scary question to even start to consider and start to think about, because of, as we've talked about, all the things that you might realize or might come up that, like, oh, wow, maybe I don't actually have a very clear answer of who I am. And that can be frightening, I think.
I had a discovery call for a potential client last week. That question came up. He said, look, I'm scared to ask those questions. I know I need to, but I'm scared of, one, doing the work, and two, what answers am I going to get? What if I don't like who I am? Or what if I figure out who I am and the life I'm living doesn't represent who I am at all? Then do I have the courage to just uproot my life and go live one that's going to be more congruent with who I am? But I tell all my clients, that's why we have to start with values. If we could start with values and understand our value system, then we can understand where we want to make our decisions from an intentional place going forward. So for me, I've named 6 values for myself in my life. And it's vitality, vibrancy, purpose. I've mentioned those words a lot today already, right?
Yep.
Freedom, love, and sacred connection. So defining the values, you could go as simple as saying family, business, etc. But like, that's a little too superficial. Like, try it out once, see what you come up with, revisit it a month later, see if you can go a level deeper. No pun intended. So if you can get a little deeper, then you can figure out, what do these things actually represent to me? So like for me, vitality, life force energy, vibrancy, feeling alive, purpose, living a purpose-driven life, freedom, the 4 freedoms: time, location, thought, and financial. And financial is the last one for me. Not that I don't want money, but I actually want the other ones first. And I think the other ones will create the space for me to make all the money I need to be financially free. But I don't want to trade my time anymore just to make money so I can go buy freedom. Because that's where I operated from that space my entire career. It was, let me work more. Let me keep working more, working 5 days a week, 40 hours a week as a dentist, a lot of clinical dentistry. It's very tough on your body. There's no room or time for you to think about anything. And then you go on vacation once in a while and you just sit on a beach. That's not for me living. For some people it is, and they love that. That's perfect. That's perfect for you if that feels like true alignment. But if you're so exhausted from your life and you just want to go plop on a beach and then you feel great on vacation, it's not because of the free booze and all the food. It's probably because you're in a tropical place with a lot of sun and you're not in an environment that's not conducive for your body. So we all think vacation is great because of these things that, you know, might not be present in our daily life, but it's actually just because those things aren't in your daily life. Like, you get rid of the work headaches and you're like, oh, I feel free. Well, you know, you could live a life where you have a life-work balance instead of a work-life balance. That's my philosophy. And every decision I make is from an intentional place of like, is this moving the needle toward me living life and then fitting work around that? So I've been able to condense my dentistry into 3 days. We grew the business enough that I could work for 3 days as a dentist. I got 4 days of freedom and space for me to be able to go ahead and create and go do the things that I really want to do in an environment that's maybe not the perfect environment for me. New Jersey is not exactly the best place for me. I've learned this, but I'm making the best of my situation. So I get outside in nature. I get out in the sun. I go for a trail run. I do those things that charge me up. And as I get charged up, I'm able to be more impactful for all the people I talk to and influence.
I know what's probably happening right now. You just heard the ad music play. You're starting to tune out exactly what I'm saying so you can skip this ad and get back to the conversation, and I'm going to encourage you not to. Because if you continue to skip this ad in order to get back to the conversation, then at some point there may not be a conversation for you to get back to. Okay, now that I have your attention, that might have been a little bit exaggerated. Likely, I'm not going to stop producing this show, but you can help me make this show a lot more viable, and so I can continue doing this into the future. Fun fact, I don't make any money from this show. In fact, I actually pay in order to create these episodes on a weekly basis. And while that may not exactly seem like your problem or your issue, if you like meaningful conversations like the ones that we have here, well, then it is your problem. I could use your help in the form of financial support specifically in order to keep this show going and continually invest back into creating it. Here's another fun fact. If everyone listening to this episode were to donate the single cost of a cup of coffee, I could probably do this as a full-time job. That is a dream and a vision I have for myself one day, and I want this to be like PBS or NPR, where it's funded by the viewers. I'm imagining a show where we, together, collectively, decide that these meaningful conversations are important to us, and we don't rely on outside help or advertisers in order to keep them coming on a weekly basis. So yes, this is a long-winded way of saying I'm asking you for money. If you're in a place where you feel comfortable doing so, I am asking you to make a small donation to support the show. You can do that by following the link that is in the show notes of this episode to a place called Buy Me a Coffee. Now, by buying me a coffee through this platform, you're not actually buying me a coffee. It's just kind of a mental construct to make this transaction of money a little bit more tangible. Thank you in advance for considering supporting me, supporting the show, and for supporting meaningful conversations like the one we're about to get back to right now. Yeah. I had a question in there and then I lost my train of thought, but I do love the idea of you talked about at the end there, making the best of your current situation. You know, that's an interesting one. I think it's easy to think that we have to be in a different situation in order to be able to be our best selves, or, you know, we start to learn these things about what we feel like we want in life or need in life. We define some of our values, and then maybe our current situation doesn't in the moment match. Tell me a little bit more about how you've kind of just like thought about how do I make the most of my current situation, knowing maybe I can't just uproot everything and change all in this exact moment. What's that thought process been like for you?
It's a great question. So at first it was, yes, getting clear on values. Like, what are my non-negotiables? So I figured out the values, I figured out my non-negotiables, and I start making intentional decisions to have the things that I know that I need in my life to be in my life. So you get more protective of your time. So if I used to have a bevy of certain calls at a certain, it's like, no, I need my time with my son. So I'm actually going to be more protective of that time. Or I know I need the time outside. So I'm going to go outside, even if it's cloudy, you know, creating structure within the life. And I'm not trying to sound so masculine, but it's actually quite the opposite. It's been like allowing the feminine into my life and embracing those feminine qualities in me, where it's like, let me listen to myself. Let me feel what I need. And then actually make decisions from that place, as opposed to, I'm going to go do the cold shower, then I'm going to do the cold plunge, then I'm going to do like we all wake up with this 2-hour routine that we need in the morning, but we do it with a very rigid guideline. And I think that creates a lot of disconnection from our body, because then if you don't do that ritual, you start panicking. You start having anxiety. Oh my God, I'm going to have a bad day. I didn't do my breath work and my meditation and my journaling. And by the way, ask me how I know this. That's how I used to be. Before my son was born, I had a 2-hour morning ritual, and I felt like I didn't do enough if I didn't get that ritual done. But I was completely out of my being. As humans, we are supposed to be human beings, right? People talk about being human doings. So for me, I actually think for men, the masculine typically dominates and creates a very rigid structure for us. And that rigidity creates a lot of forced, focused, task-oriented things that we have to go do. So we spend a lot of time doing, and we're out of our being. Whereas if we can focus on being, and this is where the feminine is important, where we can learn from the women in our lives, allow some feminine in, get into this place of being, and within the being will be the doing, because the being will spur action, because you will be inspired to go take action, because you have been so within yourself that you are excited to now go be generative. There's magic within the feminine. So I'm not saying guys who are listening to this be like, oh, I'm going to go from 100% masculine to 100% feminine. No, I'm saying go from 100% masculine to 80% masculine and let in 20% feminine and start playing with those polarities a little bit and those energies. And you'll find you'll allow some things into your life that are going to help you move the needle faster than if you just push, push, push. Because all we do is push, 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 and then we end up burned out. And we don't listen to our bodies until they break. So normally it takes a massive thing in our life to get our attention. Your business goes bankrupt. You get into a car accident. You get really sick. You break something. Somebody dies, and then you listen. But if we could be more proactive instead of reactive, because we've done this work to figure out who we are and make intentional decisions to live a life that's going to be more congruent with us, and we've got better boundaries with ourselves and with others and with our time, then we can go really live the life that we want, even if your environment's not perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that was a lot of my story. You know, my dad died when I was 17 years old, and that was a big moment for me of kind of awakening. And he had just turned 50 years old. And so that put me into that was one of those big events that kind of woke me up. It was like, made me think about in a different way, you know, what do I want for my life? And, you know, just some of these ideas around like we work our whole lives and then we assume that we're going to have retirement later. And, you know, you talked about the idea of feeling like we're going to buy our freedom. And so I was thinking the same thing. If I'm going to work a ton, make a bunch of money, and then I'll be able to buy my freedom. And then at some point down the line, I'll have this coveted freedom thing that I've been looking for. And when my dad died at 50, it was just like, he didn't get the chance to get to this retirement phase where you get to enjoy all of this freedom that you've been working for 30, 35, 40 years. And it made me start to rethink, you know, okay, how can I just plan my life differently? How can I bring some of this freedom into my life now? How can I enjoy some of these things? And that led me to do a similar thing where it's like, well, what do I actually value? And then how do I align my life to it? So I hear you in that. That was one of those big events for me. And now I think my hope is that through having some of these conversations, through sharing some of my story, people don't have to go through a major life event like that in order to be able to start to think about their values, maybe start to make some of these changes.
Well, for starters, thank you for sharing that story, because I didn't know all of that. And I couldn't help but smile a little bit, though, because you're living in a van, like out in wherever it is you want to go in the country, seeing beautiful things. And to me, I'm assuming, again, I'm making an assumption, but I'm assuming that feels like a much more lively experience for you to actually be able to see and witness the beauty that you're seeing on a daily basis. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of mundane within living in a van that I don't know about and I can't relate to, but I would imagine that the beauty outweighs the mundane. And someday maybe you'll settle down in a single family home somewhere but think about it, you'll have experienced all these different beautiful places in the world that now you'll feel a lot more confident in wherever the place is that you decide to settle, because you've now seen all the other things. Whereas for me, I built my life in New Jersey, and it's like, oh, well, you know, New Jersey doesn't really feel like the place, but I'm here. So what do? But I never experienced or witnessed anything else. So for you to have that presence of mind, you and your wife, to go journey through the country and take a risk, live in a van, do something completely unorthodox, you're now giving yourself experience to be able to make that much more of an intentional decision whenever the day is that you feel like you need to plant roots. And that's very I have a lot of admiration for something like that. And that's a lot more of deeper thinking than I had at your age. And I'm envious of that experience a little bit as well. Not in a bad way, but like, wow, what a gift that you're actually being able to live your life in that way.
Hey, time out really quickly, just because your mic just cut out or switched. It just went from, you cut out for a second there, and now it switched to maybe your headphones. You're not sounding as good. I don't want to pause. We'll pause for a second just because I don't want to lose what you're saying. Okay, back. We had a quick technical difficulty. So through the magic of editing, here we are. We're back in the conversation. We were talking about, you were kind of reflecting on some of the decisions that my wife and I have made to live in the van and go experience things, and how that's kind of informed. And I mean, everything that you're saying is very much spot on as far as, you know, a lot of the intention behind this whole experience is to go experience things, go experience nature, go experience the world, live more in nature, live more freely. And it's been, it's just funny because reflecting back on some of the previous versions of ourselves, this lifestyle and the current life that I live, if I went back and told 18-year-old me that like, hey, if you fast forward 10, 12 years, this is what you're going to be doing, it would have been like, you got to be kidding me. No way. So you're spot on as far as what the intention behind it was. And it's been incredibly, incredibly meaningful. I don't know if I'm ever going to be ready to give it up.
Well, I'm curious, what gave you the courage to make that mindset shift to allow 18-year-old Chad to evolve into 30-year-old Chad who's doing the things he's doing today?
Again, I think a big part of this goes back to losing my dad, and that just had a really, really big impact on me. When he had turned 40, he had left a very successful engineering career, and he had decided, you know what, I think I have a passion for real estate, and I want to pursue something in real estate. I want to pursue something more in entrepreneurship. And so he was very pragmatic. He was like, okay, I want to go into real estate. Now, like you talked about, and I, looking back on it, like you can just recognize he's 40 years old. He has 3 kids. It's a more difficult time to make that transition. And so he went and he got a job as a property manager for a few years. And then he decided to go off on his own, start his own real estate investment company. Anyway, I think just seeing all of that play out and seeing how, I think he always had these visions and dreams within him. And it wasn't until he was 40 and he was in a much more difficult place in life to pursue them that he decided to do so. So I think I kind of took notes from that and learned from that. And it's like, well, if I'm feeling some of these pulls, if I'm feeling like there's something else that I might want to do, I don't think I want to wait. I don't think, the future isn't always guaranteed. So that was really a big thing behind finding myself working at General Motors. I had the ideal life of a 21-year-old, 22-year-old. And I decided to walk away from it. And that landed me back living in my mom's basement. And I was cleaning toilets at a local brewery and trying to just figure out what I wanted to do. And it was hard. I feared people's judgment. I wasn't being applauded anymore. I felt like people were scratching their heads and they were like, what is he doing? Like, he had everything and now he gave it all up. And I don't know, I guess it was just going through some of those experiences in feeling like what felt true to me and what felt aligned to me, and getting a little taste of that feeling and then saying, how could I get more of that? How could I be more in alignment with what I feel to be true for me? That was the process that I kind of went down.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think your audience just gained a valuable amount of insight as to who the man Chad Miles is. And somehow we haven't mentioned, by the way, that both of our names are very similar.
I know. The first time we met, my wife Eileen and I, we love the name Miles. Like, I would love to name my child Miles, but I don't think that would work out that well. Miles might be kind of weird, but yeah, it's a great name. I love your name.
Yeah, if you spell it with a Y, you can see. But yeah, it seems my mother was ahead of the time, because now all these kids are all named Miles. So it used to be a unique name. So I think what you were talking about is really beautiful, though. And perhaps you got a little bit of modeling from your father, though, to have the willingness to make that counterculture decision. Because again, a father who's 40, very well established, having a successful career, 3 young children, like, takes a lot to not only bet on yourself for you, but to know that other lives are depending on you. As a child, you can't really totally understand the weight or the gravity of that. But yeah, you still had it seep into you through some level of vibration or energetic connection. Or even now, just as an adult, you can be like, oh, wow, like, I'm 30, living in a van, going across the country, having all these experiences. I can't imagine what Dad was thinking when he was 40, having a well-established career, having 3 children. Like, it makes you probably admire him and respect him in a different way, knowing that he was willing to bet on that. And hopefully he felt more fulfilled in that last decade of his life. Obviously, tragic that it was cut so short, but ultimately, I think the only thing we all can hope for is that we are living life to the absolute fullest degree. That's why for me, I no longer want to accept the normal model of what a dentist does, which is work 5 days a week. You maybe take 2 weeks off a year. But when you go on vacation, by the way, and you own your own business, unless you've created a business that runs without you, now no one's making any money. So I watched my father close his office and not make money, pay for vacation, but still pay his employees PTO. So it's a triple whammy when you're a small business owner. So now, fortunately, the business is set up in a way where we can all take vacation without it shutting down because there's enough of us. And that's certainly a vision that I would have with any business I create, is to be able to delegate. But it's important to think about these aspects of how do we really want to show up in life and how much do we really want to live it? Because if I got to 50 and I said, man, I have a bucket list of seeing every national park and I've seen 3 of them, that would be a failure for me. It would be a missed opportunity of all that beauty, because anytime you experience these things and you have that beauty come across you, whether it's nature or whatever other experience it is you want to have, there's beauty in the experience. That beauty changes you. So now you are experiencing beauty on a daily basis, and it is seeping into you and you're collapsing time. Your growth is that much more accelerated because you're having all these experiences on top of one another. Whereas if you just do the same thing for 75 years, how much growth is there?
It's definitely a belief that I share. Yeah, I think I feel myself. I know that I am growing at a different rate and in different ways that feels right. It feels good. As we start to wrap up the conversation, I want to invest a little bit of time. Why is men's work the thing that you wanted to bring more into your life? You wanted to redefine what it looked like to be a dentist. You didn't want to live the traditional dentist lifestyle. Why men's work was a thing that you wanted to cultivate more of?
Yeah, it's a great question. For myself, I witnessed the impact that me joining a men's group and being in a men's space had on me. And it was transformational. It was life-changing. So as I went through this process of becoming my own man, and very much the men's groups that I was in, I've been in 3 over the course of 4 years. They've all played a pivotal role in one aspect or another in helping me become this man. I love who I am today, and I want to be able to share that man with the world. And I want to help other men feel this way. So for me, creating a space, whether it be a program, one-to-one coaching, or just a group that meets, like I'm going to start a fatherhood group, any of those types of things, having that space where men can share openly, but without judgment, and actually be seen and heard for the men they are, as opposed to them having to have the armor up and act a certain way because that's what society expects of us. It's very valuable for them to be able to let that armor down and just be fully seen and not feel like anyone's going to judge them. And without the judgment, there's now space for men to learn from each other's experience. One man opens up and shares his experience, and then 3 other guys in the room say, holy cow, I'm going through that exact same thing. And then now all of a sudden you have 4 men who are bonding over a thing that they didn't know existed before. I had one of my groups, one man talked about the struggles they were having with getting pregnant and how they were considering IVF treatment. And then 3 other guys raised their hand and said, we're going through the same thing. And it was one of the best conversations that group ever had. And no one knew until that man felt safe enough to mention it. So the container has to be set in a way where it's creating safety, which creates trust, which creates commitment, which creates sharing, which creates the magic moments that you don't know when they will happen. When they do, it's a very potent thing. And then it builds upon one another. And then you have these moments where hopefully you get in person and you can start to actually feel the transformation within you and embody these practices, which is another aspect of the men's work that I want to do, which is actually help men get out of their heads and get into their hearts. And if we can be more, I have a concept called the embodied alpha. Now, I know alpha is a negative word for people and it's very charged, very stereotypical, but if we can be this embodiment of this higher evolved man who is willing to communicate in an open way with his heart open and be able to be a tender lover, but also be able to tap into the warrior and still be a protector, someone who has this ability to balance both sides, and someone that you know and you trust, and he's of high integrity and you want to be around this man. He's the man that men are willing to die for, the man that children revere, and the man that women want to be with. If you can be this man, this higher, more embodied version of a man, that to me would be more impactful than anything else we can do. So through men's work, I'd like to help other men become this version of man, to create a level of impact where the web is endless. If I touch 10 lives, they then touch 10 lives, then they touch 10 lives. And that's how true impact is created. So I'm not after a number of lives to change, but I am after deep, deep impact. I want to go a level deeper with people. And if I can do that and help them become the best version of themselves, think about how many better situations there would be for families, right? Because how many men are not showing up in a powerful way to lead their families, where we're abdicating all our responsibility to our wives. We're telling them, you're the boss, you make the decision, because we don't want to be bothered. Or I have people come in there. I have patients who say, oh, well, yeah, I've got 2 kids. Oh, no, wait, I have 3 actually. And they make a joke about how their husband's another kid that they take care of. Like, that's not a man. That's not being a man. Your wife should know that you can take care of yourself and that she can rely on you to actually help her take care of things. Now, and society's changed. We have to be more involved as men. So we're wearing more hats than ever because we're now expected to be helping at home. So, and our wives are working. So now we need to help at home, and our wives are working, so they can't do as much at home like they used to in the traditional sense. So all of a sudden we have more energy outputs than ever, and we have more opportunity for dopamine hit after dopamine hit to allow ourselves to numb so we don't have to feel. And all of a sudden we have a lot of disconnected marriages. Why do we have so much divorce? Why are so many people getting divorced? 1, because they probably got married without knowing who they are. And 2, because we have disconnected marriages where both people are living parallel lives because they're both working, they're not home, the family unit is broken. There's no common ground, the unions are not strong. So if I can help a man understand who he is and be more present in his relationship and give more of himself to his wife and now also to his children, and he can really model this level of man, what kind of ripple effect will that have? I think that's why I want to do this work.
A big one and a powerful one. I think that's the kind of ripple effect that it can have. You know, I think it's why I have so much belief in these conversations in this show, is sometimes it just takes an example of 2 men connecting in a way that is deep, is authentic, taking a look at, asking some of those deeper questions that we've talked about in our lives. And if we can maybe model some of that, examples, be an example to it, what kind of impact can we make? And I think it's a really big one. I think it's a very, very big one. So I appreciate you showing up as yourself. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, you know, it's not 2 different lives. It's not 2 different versions of you. It's you authentically embracing and living out all of who Miles Santo is. And I'm grateful that you are doing that. And I know that there are many men at this moment, and will continue to be many men that you will influence and impact, that will also be grateful for you for making some of these choices and decisions in your life. So I wanted to just recognize that and say, I'm proud of you. And I can't wait to see all that you continue to do with this platform. There's a million other things that I want to get to, so you'll have to come back. We'll have to do another part 2. I'd love to talk about fatherhood. I'd love to talk about, you've got some interesting kind of perspectives on money that we didn't get to today, so we'll have to do it again. If people wanted to find you and some of the awesome stuff that you are sharing online and maybe connect with you, what is the best way for them to be able to do that?
Yeah, well, first I would like to say thank you for that feedback. Typically, older Miles would have brushed it off, but I am fully receiving what you just said. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
As far as how people could find me, if they are more interested in learning about what I am doing, the mission that I am on, and the level of impact that I desire to create, they can find me on Instagram right now. That's the main platform that I share on. It's Miles_Santo, Miles_SANTO. If they want to connect there, I do check that daily, so I will get back to someone if they had any questions. Otherwise, my email is my name, miles.santo@gmail.com. Certainly feel free to send me any emails. I do have a program that I am releasing in August that I'm very happy to share with anyone if they were interested in learning more about vitality and vibrancy and purpose. And it's called the Reclamation Program. It's a 6-week journey where I think it will be highly impactful for men. But I just have a strong desire to serve as much as I can. You know, for me, I make enough money from dentistry. It's not about making more money. It's not about making this a thing that, again, who doesn't like money? But for me, it feels abundant to me to be able to share this part of me with the world. it feels like this is a gift of myself that I can't totally share in dentistry. I do share myself with my patients, but it's different. People are nervous. They don't really want to be in the dentist office. So there's a lot of negativity where people are like, I don't like the dentist. I'm like, cool. I've never even met you, but there's a level of needing to accept that, so this is a different avenue, a different forum where I can express myself in a way where people are feeling a little bit more confident and a little bit more positive. So overall, if anyone felt compelled, I would love to connect.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for going a level deeper with me. Thank you for your friendship. I'm grateful that we've met each other on this journey.
Thank you. I'm blessed to be here.
What did you think of that episode with Miles? I'd love to hear from you. You can follow and join the conversation either on Instagram at @ALevelDeeper, or you can send me an email directly, aleveldeeperpod@gmail.com. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this episode. As I was listening back, this idea of thinking for yourself is the thing that really stood out to me from this episode. How I think it's hard to do. I still find it at times hard to do, where I'm thinking about, am I making decisions from a place of thinking for myself or thinking the way I believe others want me to think, want me to show up? Exploring and asking Miles about, how do we go about thinking for ourselves in the first place was fun for me, because I think it's a journey that I am still on as I try to figure out what that means for me. And how do I know if I'm truly thinking for myself or thinking on sort of behalf of someone else in my life? It's a difficult question. I guess it's one that I'm going to continue to chew on, and I would love to hear some of your thoughts on it. If you want to send me a message or connect with me, these are the kinds of conversations that I enjoy having. There's so much that happens in the course of these episodes. I like to sort of digest and dissect what came from it, because there's a lot of things that I think we can all take, a lot of tools that we can all take and put in our toolbox for later. And that's what the show is all about. So my friend, thank you for being here. Thank you for investing into meaningful conversations like this. If you enjoyed the episode, if you have the means of doing so, I would really appreciate your support in keeping the show going and bringing more meaningful conversations like the one that you listened to today, like the ones that we have here on this show. You can do so by heading to the link that is in the show notes of this episode to a platform called Buy Me a Coffee, and buy me a digital coffee, which is just a way to make a donation to support the ongoing production of this show. Thank you in advance for considering. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of making the world a little bit more meaningful. I'll see you next time.